Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarves was the first feature-length animated film ever released, and it was such an iconic and groundbreaking entry into cinema history that it changed the field of filmmaking forever because it brought animation into the ring. And now we've got this deep catalog of animated Disney movies that are classics. And you've also got movies that have pushed the boundaries of what animation can do with movies like Into the Spider-Verse. And finally, after all these years of animation just growing and changing and thriving because of 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, we are finally getting a live action version. Why would I want to look at a beautiful animated movie when I could see actors? I'm just kidding. I like both live action and animated movies. I like film in general, and I'll even say that a lot of the Disney live action remakes have been okay, but they've been on a little bit of a decline, and I don't really care to talk about it at all. In fact, hi there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Summer, and today we're going to be talking about this live-action version of Snow White that I found at the thrift store for $1. It is called Snow White, the Fairest of Them All. It came out in 2000, and if you look right there at the top of the box, oh yeah, baby. This is a Hallmark movie. I think I want to do something a little bit different this time. Do a little bit of a live reaction, so join me, if you will, on the couch. Hey, here I am over at the couch. I've decided that this time around, I want to do something cozy and a little fun. Also, microphone. I'm trying a new thing with audio. I've had this microphone for a little while, but I keep not knowing how to use it correctly. I keep being like, yeah, my microphone, I can figure this out. I am a competent woman who has worked in the audio-visual field, not really audio, but the visual video media field for many, many years. That is how I make my bread and how I make my butter. So this is a mountain I can climb. But then every time I try and climb the mountain, I just find myself flopping down the hill and falling and twisting my ankle. And then I'm crawling through the dirt, crying because I can't figure it out. And I thought, okay, what if instead of just giving up, I try and use the microphone in a new and exciting way that I've never tried to use it before. Halfway decent chance I might get usable audio out of this. Worst comes to worst, I film this and this footage never sees the light of day. So if you're seeing this, it saw the light of day and it worked out. And I thought, what if, when I'm doing an off-the-shelf review, where I'm taking a movie off my shelf and reviewing it, I just sit down and kind of watch it with you? So here's how I figure this is going to go. Don't know if I'm going to try this sort of format again, unless you guys like it. Let me know at the end what you think of this, because this is an experiment. But I think what I'll do is I'll sit here, big cozy sweater, cat sitting next to me. Here, let me get a shot of that baby angel. Hey, baby angel. Me and my sweet cat Mitzi are gonna watch this movie together. Yeah. I think what I'll do is I'll just check in with you about every 15 minutes or so, give you a little update on how the movie's progressing, or if I see something wild and crazy, I'll get some footage on my phone and we'll chat about it. We'll touch base. You and I will sit and we'll discuss. All right, I've got a bowl of popped corn. I've got a chocolate chip cookie if I want it, and I've got a fresh and crispy Diet Coke, or at least it was fresh and crispy about 40 minutes ago when I had dinner. Now it's just a quarter of the way drank through and getting flatter every second that I sit here talking. Let's see, is there anything else I want to say before I get this party started? No. Check-in number 1. First, I think Hallmark used to make way more exciting movies because there were 3 trailers on this movie. One was just like this montage of Hallmark adventure movies where it was like fairy tales and like an astronaut in a field of daisies. Just, it seems like before they went full Christmas magic romance, they actually made a bunch of different kinds of movies that were like more action based. So that was interesting and exciting to know. I think they also probably had a period of time where they made a bunch of fairy tale movies, because I remember doing research for the Hallmark Royal Christmas movie, and I saw one that was called The Snow Queen. And I knew that I didn't need to worry about watching The Snow Queen because it said it was based on the Hans Christian Andersen. I might be getting that one wrong. It was based on the fairy tale, The Snow Queen. So I was like, that's not a Hallmark Christmas movie. That's just a fairy tale. But it was made years and years and years ago, probably around the time that Snow White, the fairest of them all, was made, and around the time that Jack and the Beanstalk, the real story, was made. So the second trailer was for Jack and the Beanstalk, and Matthew Modine, Papa, you are like Papa, was in there as like a scientist who was like, we've got this all wrong. There are giants and they are real. Fee fi fo fum. And then the third trailer was for something that seemed like it might have been Swiss Family Robinson, because it said they were a family and it said they were Swiss and there was a big tree house, but it was just called Stranded. And so I think it was the Hallmark version of Swiss Family Robinson. And please keep in mind that the only thing I know about Swiss Family Robinson is that if you go to Disneyland, there's that big treehouse you can walk around in, and that's the Swiss Family Robinson treehouse. And my mom, or it's the Tarzan treehouse now, and my mom always says every time we go to Disneyland, I remember when I was little, and that was the Swiss Family Robinson treehouse. And I'm like, what's the Swiss Family Robinson? I ain't never heard of the Swiss Family Robinson. So there we are. Hey, nobody cares about this but me, but I did my research and I was right. It was Tarzan's Treehouse. As of 2023, they did a refresh and it's now called like Adventure Treehouse, and it is inspired by Swiss Family Robinson. So they have flipped back to the original. They took away the Tarzan and it is now going back to its roots of the Swiss Family Robinson. Again, I say to thee, I've never seen Swiss Family Robinson. But that gets us caught up to the trailers. So the movie's taking a little bit of a different approach to Snow White, because Snow White and her family start off as paupers. We see this charming little cottage with apple blossoms blowing all over the place, and Vera Farmiga, the lady from the Insidious movies, and Mrs. Bates from Bates Motel. She is the mother in this situation. She opens the window. Oh, no, she accidentally pricks her finger. Blood drips on these apple blossoms. And she's like, what if my baby had really red lips and black hair and skin that glowed like apple blossoms or snow? And then boom, baby time, and the family's happy, they're laughing, they're spinning around, and the dad's like, what should we name our child? And she's like, Snow White. Oh, And then she keels over because she's dying of childbirth, and nobody realized it until that exact moment. Then she does in fact die of childbirth, and then he carves her a magnificent wooden headstone, and then as he's like grabbing the dirt of her grave in one hand and the baby in the other, he's like, my darling Josephine, I have to go. She'll starve if she doesn't get milk. She'll starve if she doesn't get milk, but you just spent 8 years carving her this magnificent headstone. Okay, either way, it's fine. So he starts wandering through the woods, and then somehow the woods leads to a barren, snowy wasteland, and he's like, I know there's a village around here somewhere. Where is the village? Can't find it. He collapses to the ground, and he cries 2 sweet tears that fall onto the snow, and when they fall onto the snow, they defrost a blue eye, and then this horrible goblin creature sits up and is like, thank you for giving me your thank you for giving me my freedom. Is there anything you'd like? And he's like, milk for my baby. And he's like, here. 1 second. And the guy goes, milk. Oh, you saved my baby. Is there anything else you need? My wife Josephine back, my queen. I think this guy's a genie. And here's why. Now, one thing to keep in mind, like I said, they're paupers. And this whole time I was like, how is Snow White going to become a princess if her dad is a poor man? Let's see how this plays out. Well, when he says, I want my wife Josephine back, my queen, and then the scary goblin genie is like, so sorry, can't bring people back from the dead, but I can give you a queen, and you'll need a kingdom to go with it. And the dad's like, oh, sure, yeah, everybody needs a kingdom. And then the genie, I assume he's a genie, because he says, okay, that's what I'll do. That's 3 then. And he puts on his hood and then he disappears. And it was the no dead people and the 3 wishes that makes me think that this was a genie frozen in snow, because that's a traditional part of the Snow White fairy tale. We're all familiar with that part, right? Okay, so then all of a sudden, hard cut to 3 men in very tall hats carrying a crown up to this pauper, and they put the crown on his head, and he's like, hey, I'm not the king. And I this isn't my kingdom. And the 3 men in very tall hats are like, listen, bro, we know our kingdom's not that great. You don't have to be a jerk about it, but it's definitely your kingdom. Maybe you hit your head or something. Cut again to a beautiful forest. A rainbow beams down from the heavens to bloop, land upon the ground. And from each color of the rainbow is one of the 7 dwarves, or should I say 6 dwarves and 1 very tall man. And before my timer went off, they were saying that they need to go find the gnomes because they have to go do gnome chores, and nobody's gotten any mail recently and nobody's had any milk in a long time and they miss milk. But we do know that the baby had milk because the genie pulled a milk bottle out of his sweater. But he wasn't wearing a sweater, he was wearing a vest. He was wearing robes. Fancy genie robes. All right, let's get started and let's watch more of the movie. All right, so check in 2. I keep having to stop and rewind so I can get clips of things that are sticking out to me. What we learn is that I think the 7 dwarves in this movie are actually 7 gnomes, and they are all named after the days of the week. Red one is Monday, the orange one is Tuesday, the yellow one's Wednesday, the green one is Thursday, the blue one is Friday, the indigo one is Saturday, and then the violet one is Sunday. And Sunday's kind of the leader, and he's like, hey, we all have to go look for the gnomes. It's not that they have to do gnome chores, it's that their brother gnomes are missing. And so he sends them off to different parts of the kingdom to go look for them. And he goes to this little farm where there's a bunch of frozen gnomes, knocks on one of the gnomes, and he's like, Irving, you gotta wake up. Turns out they're all getting turned into plaster gnomes by a scary looking witch lady. And the scary looking witch lady is the horrible goblin genie man's sister. And he's like, sister, I have been freed. And she's like, oh, get away from me. You made your deal with darkness. Leave me out of it. And he's like, 3 wishes granted. Don't you want to be a queen? And she's like, no. It's a very big back and forth. Clearly, there is some animosity between these 2 siblings. And then the tall, creepy, scary goblin man decides to stand right behind his sister with his head right here. And he's like, listen to me, sister. Don't you wish that you could do... Imagine that this is a woman's head and I'm a tall, blue-gray genie man with Claude Frollo hair. Sister, don't you wish that you could be a queen? You must listen to me, sister. While all that's happening, the purple gnome, Sunday, is like, Irving, you gotta wake up. And then Elspeth, the scary-looking lady, comes up and she's like, oh, and she turns him into stone, and then she goes back to her brother, and her brother's like, look into this mirror. I promise you, it's not a trick. Just look into it. And she's like, no, no, no. She's screaming and she's crying. She doesn't want to. And then she does. Boom. She's beautiful. And she's like, what is this? What kind of trick is this? What is this going to cost me? And he's like, it's going to cost you nothing. Just be happy. And I think that's because she would be if he has to, like, he gets magical, it seems like, this is what I'm picking up from what they're putting down thus far. He made some sort of dark deal, probably why he looks the way he does. And in order to get a certain amount of powers, he has to grant 3 wishes. And so he is going to make his sister beautiful as a free little gift to her so that he can give the dad his 3 wishes, one of which is a queen. And so she gets very happy. She spins around a whole bunch, goes running off down the road, turns around, comes back, hugs her brother, goes back again. And then it cuts to the king. He's now in purple robes. He seems like he's fitting into royalty a little bit better, still has his little baby. And all the women in the court are like, what a beautiful child. Look at her beautiful eyes. Oh, can I hold her? And he's like, no, no one can hold my baby. But then he turns around, boom, sees that knockout with the incredible red hair. And she's like, can I hold your baby? Oh, boop. She's like, can I hold your baby? And he's like, oh, and almost holds the baby out to her. But then Snow White starts crying. So he's like, no, thank you. And then he turns around, runs out of the building, sniffs a couple roses and says, smell the roses, baby. Aren't they beautiful? And then just because I think he has a lot of conflicted feelings over the fact that his wife Josephine is gone, but he just thought this woman was very beautiful, he decides to run through a hedge maze about it. This is very upsetting to Elspeth because, you know, she thought, once I have beauty, won't I have everything? And so she starts mumbling to herself and she says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And when she turns to look at the mirror, her brother is like, break it! And then he's like, oh, I need you to break the mirror. Trust me, break the mirror. She's like, no, I don't want to break the mirror. I love this mirror. This mirror makes me pretty. And he's like, no, trust me, break the mirror. This man's never going to fall in love with somebody who is not his wife unless you break this mirror. And I realized it's fortunate that I mentioned the Snow Queen earlier because they're going by Snow Queen rules. So if you've ever read the Snow Queen, it's very different from Frozen, which is technically an adaptation of the Snow Queen. But in the Snow Queen, the evil Snow Queen, she's a snow queen. In the story of the Snow Queen, there is an evil Snow Queen, and she breaks an evil mirror, and all the little shards of the mirror go floating around on the winter wind. And one of the shards lands in the eyeball of a very sweet little boy who's best friends with a very sweet little girl. And these two cutie pies are in love with each other, but they're also like children. But once that shard is in that little boy's eye, he can only think about the Snow Queen. And he's like, I have to go through the snows and find my mistress and then like pay homage to the Snow Queen. And his little friend is like, no, this is my best friend and the boy I love. I have to go after him. And so she goes on this like odyssey to save the boy she loves, meets a bunch of people, has to do a bunch of trials until finally she faces the Snow Queen. She manages to get the evil shard out of her beloved's eye, and then they all live happily ever after. Well, Evil Queen here, pre-Evil Queen business though, to become Evil Queen, she breaks the mirror gets sucked up into the sky, and this is when the gnomes are like, crazy weather we're having, and they're like, weather we didn't make. So we're learning more and more about these weekday named gnomes. Apparently they control the weather and they travel on a rainbow. And they notice the swirling glass and they think it's some sort of weather phenomena that they were not in charge of. But one of the pieces of glass lands right in the king's eye, and he finally like collapses, wakes up. First thing he sees is the beautiful queen, or soon to be queen. She comes in with a very small bowl of what I assume must be soup, gives him a single sipful of the soup from the world's biggest soup spoon, and is like, let's kiss now. And he's like, let's kiss. And they go, their lips barely brush. Snow White starts crying again. And he's like, I have to go to my baby. And she's like, right now do you have to go to your baby? And then he's like, I guess I could kiss you more. They kiss. We cut to 16 years later. Beautiful Snow White is a beautiful teenager now, and she's very beloved. Anytime the royal carriage goes by, all the children are like, Snow White, Snow White. And then all the adults are like, Princess. Princess. And then the stepmom is like, Snow White, sit down. You're acting like a little monkey and waving your arms around, and you're not showing the decorum needed from a princess. Let's get back to the palace ASAP. A prince is coming. One must assume that it's to woo Snow White. We'll find out soon, though, because we're all caught up. I will check back in with you in about 15 minutes. Okay, so I'm invested now, and I I'm actually digging this version of Snow White. This has some Hallmark cheesiness to it, but it actually is pretty well done. It is a unique retelling of Snow White, and it's got like a good budget, you can tell. So where did I leave off? I left off with there being them hurrying back to the palace because the prince was there. So we do see the prince, and he's just kind of like creeping through the window like, ooh, who's that pretty girl? The pretty girl is Snow White, of course. And Snow White just kind of wants to hang out with her dad. She's like, why don't we go to the garden? The apples are blooming and the roses are beautiful. And he's like, I can't right now. His whole attitude, he was very whimsical with his wife, happy and like, smell the roses, Snow White, until he got that shard of mirror in his eye. Now he's just kind of like 16 years older and just like, no, Snow White, I don't want to go see the flowers. Just don't bother me anymore. I love my two girls, but you guys are always fighting. So she goes running into the garden, which is chock full of gnomes. It's then she meets the prince. They don't say much, but the chemistry, undeniable. They make eye contact, significant eye contact, and they don't stop making eye contact. All they do is look at each other. And you know what? It's cute. I like it. But you kind of get the vibe that the queen is also trying to flirt with the prince. You get this vibe specifically because she says, oh, my husband's really old. He's much older than I am. So I just wanted to let you know that he's boring and old and his daughter's boring. I'm a lot of fun though, and I'm way younger than my husband. And that's because they do some slightly aged up makeup on the king, but she has stayed pretty much the same, you know, because her beauty is from magic. So she can stay enchantedly young the entire time. One thing I forgot to mention was when she shattered the big mirror so that the shards could go in his eye, she got to keep one piece of the magic mirror. And so now she has this big round room dedicated to mirrors where she can run around and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And then her own reflection will lean out of the mirror and say, you are, you are. You are the fairest of them all. And she laughs and she spins around. And this reminds me so much of the scene from Return to Oz and the princess who changes her face. I don't know if they were inspired by that, or in my mind, it's been so long since I've watched both of them that I mixed the two movies up. But yes, so she's spinning around having a great time. The king comes in and he's like, hey, beautiful, want to know what's crazy? You don't look a day older than the day we met. Meanwhile, I've gotten kind of old. And then he like takes her in his arms and he's like, what if we kissed and hugged and smooched a little bit because it's been a while? And she's like, no, thank you. I don't want to kiss and hug and smooch you. And he's like, no, I think maybe we should kiss and hug and smooch. And he tries to force it. So she smacks him in the face and that little piece of mirror pops right out of his eyeball. It's been in his eyeball for 10 years. And one thing I will say, props to the makeup team because his eye has looked irritated and had a little bit of red around it ever since the glass went into his eye. So I think that's a nice attention to detail. They made it obvious that his eye was always itching and it always looked visibly irritated because he had a big old shard of glass in there. And he's like, look at this. Look, this is a shard of glass. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see anything. What? You're stupid and crazy. Dumb. He's like, this is actually a piece of mirror. And then he looks around the room he's in and he's like, this is a big old giant room of mirrors, isn't it? And then she's like, hug me, my love. Tell me that I have the place of honor in your heart. And the king's like, no, you don't. Because the place of honor is for guests. You rule my heart. I would give it to you on a golden platter. And she's like, that's really nice. Thank you. And then later in the night, she goes into his room and she reaches into his chest and says, I don't want your heart on a platter. Because I don't actually care anymore about you. And then she pulls out an even bigger shard of mirror. She's like, I just want myself out of your heart. And this is why, again, I'm pretty sure she's going to go after the prince. Only thing left to report is that the king no longer has the shard of mirror in his eye to blind him to all but the queen's beauty. And he no longer has the shard of mirror in his heart to blind his heart to all but his love for the queen. So now he's spinning around in circles, smelling the roses. He's like, I lost myself. The roses are beautiful. And he sees Snow White and he's like, my beautiful daughter, have you smelled these roses? They're exquisite. And she's like, hi, Dad, what are you doing? And he's like, you know what? I love you. And I can't believe how grown up and beautiful you are. She's like, I don't want to grow up. I just want to hang out with you, but you're always weird and not paying attention to me. And he's like, sorry. And you can hear the prince in the distance going, Snow White, Snow White. And he's like, here, have a rose and go, my girl. And because he can tell, good dad, he can tell that his daughter is, 16, has a prince interested in her. He's just happy with all the world because he's not constantly rubbing his eye like he has been for the past 10 years. And then cut to she and the prince, opposite ends of the table, still staring at each other. That's all they do. Looking forward to seeing how the rest of this goes, because this actually, while granted, and I'll admit, has a little bit of cheesiness, is pretty good. So let's get back into it. Okay, so it's been roughly 15 minutes. I forgot to set a timer. But basically, I left off with Snow White taking a look down the table and the prince looking back at her, because all they do is look at each other. So they're at a big dinner, and earlier the queen had asked what the prince liked to do for fun. And then she was like, do you like to bowl? Should we have bowling for your big party that we're having for you? And he was like, sure, I'll bowl. And then he's like, do you like bowling, Snow White? And the queen's like, don't ask Snow White. She doesn't know how to do anything fun. She's a big, saggy, soppy piece of milk toast bread. And her dad's also old, but I'm really young and fun. Remember when I told you she did that? Those were the specifics I left out. Bowling was mentioned. So now we're at the actual party. And they start to go bowling. And the prince pulls the golf maneuver. You know, like in movies and TV shows when a guy wants to show a girl how to do something, but really all he wants to do is stand behind her and wrap his big manly arms around her waist. And he uses the excuse of teaching her how to golf or teaching her how to play pool to do so. He's like, no, not like this, that kind of thing. Well, the prince does it with a bowling ball, and the maneuver just doesn't really work as well, I feel, with like a tiny bowling ball as opposed to like a golf club or a pool cue. It just doesn't, it was effective for Snow White because she was like, oh my gosh. And clearly she was feeling flustered, but I just think personally it looked a little awkward when he's like, no, comes up behind her and he's like, you bowl like this. And they're going to like tandem bowl together. Anyway, she spins away because she can't handle the flirtation. She can't handle the heat of tandem bowling. And so, do you have anything to say? So she runs away to go to a different part of the room, and she sees what everybody is actually bowling with, and they're using the gnomes as pins. Now, earlier, I also forgot to mention this. Snow White ran dramatically into the yard, stood in front of the statue of the purple gnome named Sunday, and was like, and she said it really angrily too. I think she's got some bitterness because her dad never paid attention to her, but she's like, sometimes I think you're my only friend. And so she clearly has a great affinity for these gnomes. They mean a lot to her. So she runs away from tandem bowling with the prince, goes and sees what everybody's throwing their bowling balls at, and it's gnomes. So I think Irving the gnome is dead. Violence in the streets, honestly. And so she goes running out to the garden to cry. While she's crying, the prince gets like corralled by the queen. And she's like, oh, it's so cold in here. Will you get me some punch to warm me up? And he's like, okay, I guess. And what he doesn't know is that she's been carrying around the 2 little pieces of mirror that she took from the king. And she's about to try and roofie the prince by sprinkling the piece of glass into his juice so that when he drinks it, it's going to go straight into his heart and then he'll only love the queen. But he's too busy staring after Snow White because that is his favorite pastime, is just looking in her direction. She tries to hand the glass to him. He goes, huh? Knocks it out of his hand. The juice and the glass goes careening across the room, and the glass lands in the eye of a manservant named Hector. And then Hector sees the queen and is like, and she's like, oh, dang it. So she takes the bigger piece of mirror out of her pocket that she pulled right out of the king's chest. But that gets knocked out of her hand. The prince crushes it with his boot. And then she's like, you stupid idiot boy. And then he goes running after Snow White. He chases her down. He's like, are you cold? And she's like, no, I'm fine. And he's like, please take my cloak. And then he puts the cloak on her and he's like, you're very beautiful. And she's like, no, no, thank you. That's fine. The queen's beautiful. And he's like, exquisitely beautiful. You're so beautiful. And she's like, what does beautiful even mean? And I like it. I like this direction because she goes Swan Princess. If you've seen Swan Princess, when Derek is like,
you're beautiful.
Thank you. But what else?
That's kind of what's happening here because she's like, beautiful. What does beautiful even mean? Does beautiful mean that you're kind to people or generous or careful around others? No. Does beautiful mean that you are caring, that you look out for people, that you try to do what's right? No. It's just shallow. And so then we cut from this tender romantic moment between the prince and Snow White to the room of mirrors. The queen is feeling a little bit bummed because, her plan to roofie the prince didn't work out. So she's wandering around the mirrors and she's like, maybe I'll have a little pick-me-up and I'll just say, hey, who's the fairest of them all? But instead of her own reflection coming out and saying, you are the fairest of them all of a sudden, the person leaning out of the mirror is Snow White, and she says, not you, I am the fairest of them all. And this is just earth-shattering, heartbreaking, sad despair, broken-hearted, sad times for the queen. So she just listens to that over and over again, a Snow White saying, I am the fairest of them all. I am the fairest of them all. And till eventually she just crumples onto the ground and is just like crying in a little heap. And that is when Hector the manservant comes in and he's like, my queen, love of my life, please give me a purpose. I will do anything that you bid of me because I love you. And she's like, you'll do anything? And he's like, I'll do anything. And she's like, okay. Then we cut to the garden. Clearly, somehow, the prince, now I will say, I think the prince is charming. I think they've got a cute little chemistry, and I like that they're trying to give Snow White a little bit of depth with having her be like, whoa, what else is there outside of just my beauty? Beauty isn't everything. And he's like, no, I like other things about you too. Clearly, somehow, he managed to talk his way out of that because they are on the verge of kissing, like their lips are about to brush. And then Hector the manservant comes around the hedge maze, and he's like, holding a little candle, and he's like, hey, Snow White, your parents want to talk to you. Come with me now. And she's like, okay, I guess I gotta go. Bye. And so she leaves, and Hector's like, we have to go this way to check the rabbit traps because your stepmom wants rabbit soup. And Snow White's like, Hector, if I see any rabbits in the trap that I let them out. There's no rabbits there. And he's like, okay, let's just keep going into the dark. And she's like, I'm not afraid of the dark, Hector. And then he lets her walk ahead of him a few feet. And then he's like, maybe you should be afraid of the dark. So that's where we left Snow White. Last thing I saw before I paused was the queen came out to the garden to find the prince. Now, the prince is standing next to the violet-clad statue of the gnome named Sunday. And I think they spent a lot of money on this gnome because it looks just like the actor who was playing the gnome named Sunday. And I think they really wanted to make sure they got their budget's worth because every single time this thing comes on screen, and it comes on screen a lot, they really just zoom in and focus. Like they want to remind us, hey, this was a gnome named Sunday who could talk at the beginning of the movie. Don't forget that. And also, props to the artist for making an exact replica of this actor. Really just look at it. That's what they're asking the audience to do. So they pull one of those maneuvers. We take a good long look at the gnome named Sunday. And then the queen comes out of the shadows and she's like, oh, look, it's the mighty bear and little old me. She calls him that because when he introduced himself, he was like, my name is Alexander from the clan of bears. My dad's the king named Rasmutin or something like that. Tasmania. And so he's wearing bear insignia. That's his deal. So she's like, oh, it's the mighty bear and just little old me. And he's like, where's Snow White? Stop asking about Snow White, okay? Just get over her. And he's like, Snow White. So he tries to call for Snow White and she's like, stop it, stop. Just spend some time here with me, okay? And he's like, what do you even want with me? Because I'm interested in your 16-year-old daughter because I'm at most 18 and you are even if you're younger than your husband, because you do look younger than your husband, you're late 20s, early to mid 30s, more realistically early to mid 30s. And she's like, guess. He says, what do you want from me? And she's like, guess. And then he gets scared and he runs away into the hedge maze. Do you remember a few check-ins ago when she tried to hold the king's baby and then the king almost gave it to her because she was like, wow, what a pretty woman. Yeah, pretty lady, you can hold my baby. And then he's like, wait, no, my heart's broken over my dead wife. And then he ran into the hedge maze. This woman just keeps sending men into the hedge maze. And I actually had a little something to say about that. Then I will cut if I need to. And if I need to, I'll use the other one where I say I've got stuff and then I'll go into my hedge maze rant. Hedge maze. I noticed that this is very much more the story of the queen than it even is Snow White. We've spent way more time with the evil queen than we have with Snow White herself. So it's almost, I think that's why it's called Snow White, the fairest of them all, because really we're just watching the descent into madness of this woman who was ugly, was then made beautiful, and then let that beauty corrupt her. And so I think that's what the purpose of this retelling is. So that's where we are. I'm going to check back in about 15 minutes, and this time I will remember to set a timer. I feel like there can't be much more movie left. Well, there might be a lot of movie left. There's really honestly no way of knowing how much movie is left because this is a VHS and I can't see the little timer bar. So, okay, so checking in again, jilted and offended that the prince did not want to play her reindeer games. Kiss and hug and smooch, which she should have been doing with the king. She takes her magic mirror, the one that she was allowed to keep a shard of when she broke it. Remember that? It's like a little fancy handheld mirror that she keeps in her room of mirrors. She takes it and she throws it into the dark. And watching this mirror like spin through the air as it goes after the prince who's running through the hedge maze, I was like, I've seen that before. That is something that I have seen before. So that is another memory that was locked into my mind from when I watched this movie when it came on the TV in real time when I was about 7. The mirror like hits a gargoyle statue and the gargoyle comes to life. It hits the prince and we don't see what happens to the prince, but he makes a noise like a bear. And then she says something like, "Ahaha, of the clan of bears." So we can assume, I believe, that he got turned into a bear and that bear starts chasing Snow White. And we'll get to what's happening with Snow White in just a second, because the only other thing that happens in the garden with the queen is that the flash of the mirror passing the statue of the violet-clad gnome named Sunday, who was alive at the beginning and has been a statue this whole time, he cracks in half and we see his eye move and then he runs away because he's now back to his real non-statue living self and he is escaping. So hopefully him and his buddies are all going to get reunited soon. We did briefly cut to Hector in the woods with Snow White and she's holding a rabbit because she said she's going to let the rabbits out of that trap. And then Hector has a knife and he's gonna kill her. And she's like, why? And he's like, the queen wants me to, but he starts crying because he doesn't want to kill Snow White. He's known her since she was a little girl, one would assume, and she's on a first name basis with him. And as he's crying, the little piece of mirror comes out of his eye. So he does not kill her, but he says, "Run, beautiful girl." So she starts running through the forest. We hear the thundering crash of something chasing after her that has a deep and menacing growl. So we have to assume that's the prince. The whispering haunted forest is kind of pulling from the Disney Snow White, where the trees seem to have arms, because at one point giant tree puppet arms like grab her and she gets stuck. And then the haunted forest just keeps going, "I'm gonna get you, gonna get you, gonna get you, gonna get you." So she keeps running. Hector presents the heart of a deer to the queen as Snow White's heart. She's very grateful to Hector. She kisses him through the curtain. She happily dances down to the kitchen and throws the heart in the stew pot. And then the king starts looking for Snow White and the prince because he's like, hey, where's my beloved daughter and who I have to assume is her boyfriend? And he sees Hector and he's like, Hector, have you seen the prince and Snow White? And Hector's like, what? I don't know who you're talking about. And the king goes, the prince would have taken his horse if they would have left. He says that. The second he says that, it does this quick cut pan right over to a groom who's like actively petting the prince's horse, and then whip cuts back to the king who's like, where are they? It is the most like sitcom The Office cut to a horse I've ever seen in my life. It was very funny. He's just like, Hector, where are they? They would have taken the horse. Horse. Where are they? It's so funny. It made me laugh out loud. Cut to the queen. The king is still looking for Snow White and the prince, and he walks into the breakfast room where the queen is eating stew with the world's largest spoon, and she's like, have some breakfast, honey. And so the king's like, well, I guess I could have some breakfast. He takes a big old spoonful of what looks like has to be a jiggly cooked deer heart, and he's like, almost eats it, and she's like, and then he's like, no, I can't eat right now. I have to find my daughter. And she's like, oh, you could eat. Well, don't blame me if you faint from hunger. But the king just doesn't eat the heart, and he leaves. And one of the places that he goes and checks is the queen's mirror room. But the door slams shut behind him, and he spins around in a lot of circles in his twirly skirt saying, help. And then the echoes of the mirrors around him are like, help, 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 help. And then he gets trapped inside one of the mirrors. He like falls through it. He's trapped in on the other side. He's just a reflection. She comes in and she's like, oh, there you are. I don't have to listen to you anymore. And then she's like, I want to hang out with friends and admirers. And then she says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? But to her dismay and disappointment, who comes leaning out of the mirror saying, I am the fairest of them all. I am the fairest of them all. Then Snow White herself, who's still alive. Now, up until this point, she's just used the mirror to happily gaze at herself and listen to her own voice tell her that she's pretty. And this thing apparently has way more powers than we knew, because she just keeps throwing it at issues, and issues keep getting resolved because of it. So first thing she does, she grabs the mirror, whispers, find her, into it, and then tosses the mirror as hard as she can. The mirror goes careening over the woods and over the river. Around Grandma's house we go, finally circling around to find Snow White, who at this point has been running through the forest, being, exit pursued by a bear, one assumes. She does in fact stumble over her mother's grave and sees the headstone that says beloved that her dad carved, but she just reads it as be loved, because it was broken in half. And then she has dim baby memories of her dad spinning her around happily in the cottage. And then she runs into a different field, finds a magical white horse, rides away on it. Turns out the horse belongs to the one very tall gnome who can control the weather, named Wednesday. So she rides the horse deeper and deeper into the woods until she comes upon a little house. The house there's clothes everywhere outside. So she starts organizing stuff because she's a kind soul and wants to help out. And that's where the mirror catches up to her, and it sees her putting the clothes on the horse as like a table that she can rest stuff on. Then it comes circling back to the queen. The queen's like, show me. And then the mirror shows her everything it saw while it swam away. So like this thing is way more powerful than we thought it was. When she realizes that Snow White is in fact alive, she screams really loud and goes, Hector! And then throws the mirror at Hector. Hector runs through the woods trying to get away from it. It hits Hector. Cut to black. We don't know what happened to Hector. Then she is on the roof again, has the mirror in her hand, and she sticks her hand into the mirror, and the mirror sucks her up and presumably teleports her to where Snow White is. Why has she not been taking advantage of this mirror sooner? Clearly, this thing can do way more than just tell her she looks nice. She could have been traveling the world. Oh. Anyway, that's where we left off. I will check back in with you in about 15 more minutes. Oh, before I start my next round, I realized I forgot to say, the prince getting turned into a bear is reminiscent of another fairy tale called Snow White and Rose Red, which I think is interesting that they have roses be such a big factor throughout this. If they're trying to allude to that other fairy tale, Snow White and Rose Red is very different from Snow White itself. And it's actually about two sisters who are twins. One is named Snow White and the other is named Rose Red. And the two of them are visited in their, like, they're two little beautiful girls who live in the woods, and, or, you know, maybe they're just regular aged girls who live in the woods. But a bear comes to their cottage one night, and they're very kind to the bear, and they give it food and they keep it warm by the fire. And it turns out the bear is a prince, and the prince needs to be set free from his evil curse by falling in love with and marrying one of the sisters. I believe he marries Snow White, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's interesting to me that they turned the prince into a bear, because they are now at this point combining two different fairy tales, both of which have a character named Snow White, but one of which has nothing at all to do with the original Snow White fairy tale. So I just thought that it was important to mention that, because I have read and own Grimm's fairy tales. And I'm pretty sure Snow White is a Grimm's fairy tale. And if I have that wrong, on my own head be it. That's all. Let's pick up where we left off. So, Mirror flying through the air, butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high, take a look, it's in a book, reading Rainbow. Snow White hears a growling noise, looks behind her, it's a bear. That's right, everybody, I was correct. The prince did get turned into a bear. So he's like, making sad bear noises, while Snow White runs away on a horse, and the queen's mirror flies by and says, "No, you, I don't think so." And then the mirror spins down, lands in the ground while the bear is running towards it. The bear shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it runs through the mirror, comes out the other side as a snow globe with the bear inside of it. That's not part of any version of Snow White I've ever read, but it's happening here. That's what happens to the prince. So Snow White rides back to the gnome's house, and from the mirror, the evil queen lets a beautiful purple ribbon fall in front of her. Snow White sees it. She's like, this is the most beautiful ribbon I've ever seen. She does some ribbon dancing, spins around in circles, and then she's like, you know what, this would make a beautiful belt. She ties the belt on her, and this is when we realize this is going classic Grimm's fairy tale Snow White. I looked it up. It is Grimm's. It is the brothers Grimm who wrote Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. And if you've read the classic Grimm's version of the fairy tale, you'll know that the queen tries 3 different methods of killing Snow White before actually succeeding. So try number 1 is corset related, I think. Basically, way number 1 is ribbon related. So Snow White gets a beautiful ribbon and the queen is like, "Oh, I'm an old woman, let me lace this up for you." And then when she laces her up with this beautiful ribbon, she does it way too tight, cuts off all of Snow White's air supply. Snow White falls down until the dwarves come in and cut the ribbon off of her and she can breathe again. That is what happens in the original book version of it. So in this, the queen is not an old lady. She has not disguised herself as an old woman yet. She just drops the beautiful scarf onto Snow White. Snow White ties it around her waist as a fancy little belt, and then it just goes and tries to suck her waist in, and then she's like, I can't breathe. And then she's just unconscious for hours until the sun sets and the dwarves and or gnomes come back. So the gnomes all come home and they're like, who's this chick in our front yard? And then they scatter when they hear somebody coming through the woods, but it's okay. It's just the violet-clad gnome named Sunday, who was a plaster lawn gnome, but has now become a real boy again. And he comes over and he snips the ribbon off of Snow White's waist. She can breathe again. Hallelujah, she's alive. She gets to meet all of the dwarves, or gnomes. They introduce themselves, and they are named after the week poem, where I don't know what all of the days are, but it's like Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child has far to go, Friday's child is Saturday something happens and they work hard, and Sunday has a lot of attributes that I can't remember, but that's the name poem, and they're all named after the days of the week. And now that Violet is finally back, they make a full rainbow and they can travel together as a rainbow again. This has been something they were unable to do since they were missing a very important color. So they're all hanging out together, having a grand old time. We cut back briefly to the queen. She's looking in the mirror and she's like, mirror, mirror in my hand, who's the fairest in the land? I don't know if she actually does that, but I can't say mirror on the wall since she's holding a hand mirror at this point. Basically, Snow White pops out. She's like, I'm still the fairest. This is very frustrating. She keeps trying to end this girl's life and she still just keeps living. Like, come on already. Queen's very upset. We cut briefly to some of our other characters just so we're reminded where they are. The prince, who is a bear, is still trapped in a snow globe, and the king is still trapped behind a mirror. And then we go back to Snow White and the gnomes, and Snow White's like, hey, here's a question. Just so I understand, you guys can make a rainbow, and it doesn't matter how far away the end of that rainbow is, you'll all just kind of travel to the other end? And they're like, yeah. And then she's like, okay, well, say I was wearing one of the colors of the rainbow, like yellow. If I was to wear yellow, would I be able to travel with the rainbow? And they're like, maybe. Why are you asking? And she's like, listen, the prince is still at the castle. My dad is still at the castle. All the gnomes are still at the castle. I think I need to go back to the castle and save them all from the queen. And they're like, wow. Not only are you beautiful, you're brave, and you're also courageous. And Yellow Wednesday is like, she's a stupid head, and I don't like her. So all the other gnomes are like, get in the hutch, Wednesday. Get in the hutch for your bad attitude. And so he gets put in the hutch. And Snow White tries to be like, no, stop putting him in the hutch. But they don't listen to her because it's hutch time for him. So he's in the hutch. Last thing we saw before I had to check in with you guys was a wolf had the snow globe in his mouth. I have a sneaking suspicion the wolf is Hector, because we don't know what happened to Hector when he got hit with the mirror, but I could also just be making stuff up because there's no evidence either way. All we do know is that the wolf has the snow globe with the bear inside, the bear who is a prince, in his mouth, and he runs to the river, drops the snow globe with the bear inside, the bear who is a prince, into the rushing rapids, and the bear sadly yowls as he is carried downstream. Here's my predictions. I think the next thing the queen's going to do is try the poison comb maneuver. It's going to briefly work until the gnomes save her, because that's what always happens. Then Snow White will put on yellow. I think they will find a yellow dress for her. I do not think she will wear Wednesday's woe clothes, because I don't think he'll allow them. He's too busy being in the hutch. So they're going to find a yellow dress for her. She's going to pull the rainbow maneuver. They're going to get back to the castle. She's going to try and rescue everybody. But as a last ditch maneuver, the queen is going to finally give up her beauty in order to get rid of Snow White so that she can get her beauty back. And I am either remembering the end of this movie, or I have forgotten everything and I'm just really good at guessing the ends of things because I've read a lot of books and watched a lot of movies, or, like I said, subconsciously I'm remembering the end of this movie. I think then, once she's given up her beauty, she will run back into her horrible brother, and her brother will be like, you should have just been grateful for the gift that I tried to give you, and then they will live happily ever after, because the bear will get turned back into a prince after he escapes the snow globe somehow. Those are my predictions. Let's see what happens. The Bible says pride cometh before a fall, and I think I was sounding a little proud during my last check-in because, yes, I have read the original Grimm's fairy tale, and I wasn't just really good at guessing the endings of things. I was using what I knew from the original book ending. I know how that goes, so that's not really guessing. And anyway, I was wrong, because the queen does not, in fact, try to go the poison comb maneuver. We skip over poison comb entirely, okay? So, what we, picking up exactly where we left off, first thing we see is Snow White go to the hutch and try and let Wednesday out. And Wednesday's like, here's a thought. I'm going to leave you guys all here so you can die. I don't feel like getting killed by a witch. Runs off. And I'm thinking, okay, time for her to get a yellow dress. Wrong. She doesn't get to be part of the rainbow. She doesn't get to be a Skittle. She doesn't get to taste the rainbow. She's not part of that. Because the very next morning, all the other gnomes go to check on Wednesday in the hutch, and Wednesday's back in the hutch. And she tries to ask him why. He says, "Don't try to be nice to me." He's just a very surly man. And so they all are going to go be a rainbow and go to the castle for her to get the prince and the gnomes and the king, while she stays safely locked into their house, which they've covered in leaves and ferns so that nobody can see it from the outside, not knowing that the mirror was spying on them the entire time. That's when we circle back to the queen, and this is when we see the queen do the double apple. I was right about the white and the red apple. She dips one side in a nice golden happy looking liquid and the apple turns white. I think probably it's just wax, but that's me. That's my guess. Then she takes the other side and dips it in an evil-looking bubbling red liquid, and that part of the apple just looks normal. And then, here's where the crazy twist comes. She does not turn herself into a scary old lady. Instead, what she does is she goes to the mirror room to taunt the king, and she's like, "Look at this perfect apple. White as snow, red as blood, white as snow, red as blood," the very essence of the wish of her mother. And who better to deliver it to her? Then she takes her magic mirror that can do anything and steps right on through it, and then boop, she doesn't look like the queen anymore. She looks like Snow White's dead mom and the king's dead wife. And the king's like, "Josephine, no." And she's dancing around and she's like, "I'm going to go kill your daughter dressed up as a mother." And then flies away in her magic teleporting mirror. It's late and I'm tired. There's not much movie left. Sorry, getting a little sleepy because 12:53. So, anyway, she's like, "I'm going to go kill your daughter dressed up as her mom. Peace out, A-Town down." Boop, beep, boop, beep. Boop, beep, boop, boop. Yeah. So that's her plan. Meanwhile, all of the gnomes are at the castle trying to find where the prince and the king are. And the queen is seeing all of this and she's foiling their plans left and right. And also they pull like a full Wizard of Oz, evil wicked witch in the sky, smoke riding, surrender Dorothy kind of deal, where the evil mirror smoke writes in the sky, "Ha ha ha," with an exclamation point. And that's when Wednesday's like, "The queen is on to us." And the queen is on to them. And she travels through she kidnaps Monday, gets Monday back to the house because she realizes she can't get into the door of the little cottage without one of them to show her how the door works, because it's got a special little like bone key or something. So she kidnaps Monday, makes Monday show her how to open it. Then she turns Monday into a gnome, a plaster gnome, goes into the room and is like, "Hello, Snow White. I was sent here by the little men because they were like, hey, we don't have any food at the house and she's going to get hungry. And I'm just a kind and caring soul and I've got a basket full of apples. So I said, don't worry, guys. I will go give her one of my apples. Here's my apple. We're having a great time." Oh, almost forgot. The gnomes can't rainbow back to the house because Monday's missing. And if they're missing a color, they can't turn into a rainbow. So they have to run back through the woods to get there. And at one point, they stumble across the bank of the river where the snow globe with the bear inside that's actually a prince has washed up on shore and got manhandled by a raccoon. Sunday sees that and is like, "I know this guy. I know who he is." Then we cut to the queen holding up an apple and being like, "Apple is good." That's where we are. And I feel like we're close. I feel like we're so close. So I'll see you guys in just a few minutes. Alrighty, we finished it. It's done. It's over. Let me wrap up what happened at the end. So I left off with the dwarves finding the snow globe that had the bear that was the prince inside of it. And then the queen was disguised as Snow White's dead mom, holding out the apple. She's like, "I'll give you the prize apple in my basket." Anyway, the queen disguised as Snow White's dead mom is like, "They told me you were very kind, and so that's very kind of you to want to share." Cuts the apple in half real fast and efficient with just one swipe of the knife. And then she goes and she takes both halves over to Snow White, and the The queen takes a bite of the white side of the apple. The white side is the side that's not poisoned. And then she holds out the red side of the apple to Snow White and she's like, here, gorgeous girl, here, beautiful girl, have a bite. And at this point, Snow White is kind of like recognizing her mother's scent. And she's like, what's happening here? I feel some sort of comfort. The queen is very much using this to her advantage and finally convinces Snow White to take a bite of the apple. While Snow White is taking a bite of the apple, the gnomes are throwing the snow globe against a tree until it breaks. When it breaks, the bear comes out. They then take a rope, lasso the bear so the bear can drag them quickly to the woods so they can get to Snow White faster, but they are still too late. They find Snow White dead upon the ground. They build her a sad coffin made of ice. The bear sleeps next to the coffin, wailing. All of the gnomes say goodbye. They've got Monday the gnome standing guard because he's plaster now, and all of them are like, goodbye, gorgeous girl. We're so sorry we couldn't help you. I'm so sad. We would have if we could have. And then Sunday's like, I'll see you in my dreams, which is never addressed. And then we fade to black, and the bear is sad, and we're all sad, and Snow White's in a snowy coffin, and they're making sad snow because they control the weather. So, meanwhile, back at the ranch, and by the ranch I mean the castle, the queen is like, all right, one more time, I'm gonna see if this works, holds up the mirror, and she's like, mirror, mirror, in my gosh darn stinking hand, who is the fairest in the land? And then her own face peeks out. Well, technically, Snow White's dead mom's face peeks out of the mirror and says, I am the fairest in the land. And she's like, yes, okay, cool. That means I'm the fairest in the land because I'm looking at my own reflection. And pretty soon here, I'm going to be back to my normal self and you'll just go back to being dead. So congratulations. Very nice to see you. We won. Your daughter's dead. She steps on the mirror goes up her body, transforms her back into her original self. So she starts screaming and crying because her beauty is gone, and who should come in but her brother? And she's like, brother, you're here. Please give me back my beauty. And he's like, sister, I gave you a life that anybody would be happy with. Why couldn't you have been content? And she's like, I'll be content if you just give it to me. And he's like, no, she was no threat until you made her one. I can't. You made your choice. You made your bed. Now lie in it you must. Her brother leaves. She tries to get him to stay, and she takes the mirror and throws it at him, and it shatters. And as soon as the mirror shatters, pretty much all of her spells start to break. So all of the gnomes that were in her yard wake up. All of the mirrors in the mirror room shatter. The king is able to escape. And then we go back to where Snow White is in her icy coffin, and the bear is sadly wailing next to her. A beam of sunlight goes down to her ice coffin, and we have to assume it starts melting. And the bear just starts licking at the mirror with its giant bear tongue until I guess it either defrosts enough or he licks a hole into it. And I can't say for certain, but I think True Love's kiss in this case is a big old bear lick across the entire face because it's an overhead shot. You see the bear licking the ice, and then there is no ice all of a sudden. I think you see one more lick. She opens her eyes, and when she opens her eyes, it switches camera angles, and he's the prince again, and then they kiss. But cut back to the queen. She puts back on her fancy clothes and goes wandering through the castle, and she hears something behind her, turns around. All of the gnomes that she had trapped and turned into plaster in her garden are alive. Still, I am not sure if the gnomes that I've been calling gnomes, the rainbow gnomes who control the weather and are named after the days of the week, if they are gnomes or if they are dwarves, because all of these gnomes that were called gnomes are still gnomes. They're like CG gnomes, and they attack her, and it's death by gnome. We get one final shot of a gnome coming straight for the camera, and that's how we know the witch has met her end. So there's that. I'll never know for sure. All we do know is that they control the weather and they can travel by rainbow, and they're named after the days of the week. Whatever that means, it means. So next we cut to the Granter of Wishes. That's what the guy who I thought maybe was a genie is called. His name in the credits is the Granter of Wishes. And he's played by Clancy Brown. And I looked up Clancy Brown because I wanted to know what he looked like sans makeup, because part of me felt like maybe something was there if he wasn't wearing the makeup. Hold on. Clancy Brown, young. No, I'm right. I'm right. There was something there. Look at him. Yes, I was correct. There was something there. I'm not blind. You can put all the crazy looking ugly makeup on him that you think you can, but I could see it. Anyway, Clancy Brown is also the voice of Mr. Krabs. So the granter of wishes, aka Mr. Krabs, he's walking by the side of a beautiful lake. It's sunny, it's gorgeous. He walks onto the lake, turns, looks into the sky, disappears. And that is the resolution for the granter of wishes, Mr. Krabs. And then, anyway, so True Love's Kiss. They're both alive. They all say bye to all of the gnomes who control the weather and can travel by rainbow and are named after the days of the week. And Snow White's like, "Thank you, Sunday. You're my very best friend." And Sunday's like, "Thank you. It's wonderful to see you. Oh, I forgot to say that Monday woke up and Sunday got his full range of motion back and wasn't half plaster gnome anymore." So the prince and Snow White ride off into the sunset together, and all of the gnomes who are maybe not gnomes, but who are named after the days of the week and can travel by rainbow and control the weather, they're like, "Man, it's over. I can't believe it's over." And Sunday's like, "It's not quite over." And then he looks through a spyglass and he sees the king on like one of the parapets waving to Snow White and the prince. And he's like, "Now it's over." And then they're all like, "It's over. It's really over. It's finished. It's sad that it's finished, but it's done. Over, finito." They all just keep saying that, so you have to assume that the movie is going to end soon. And it does, but not before Warwick Davis, R2-D2, and Willow himself says,
"Right, Sleeping Beauty, guys."
and that made me laugh. That really did. And then the movie ends. And that is Snow White, Fairest of Them All, the made-for-TV Hallmark movie that I found for $1 on VHS. And you know what? Here's what I gotta say. I think it was actually a pretty good movie. Like, it definitely had some cheesy, weird little things because it was a made-for-TV movie. Like, you gotta give it some grace for some of the choices it had to make, just budget-wise. Like the fact that anytime the queen traveled by mirror, I'm pretty sure she turned into a bunch of puzzle pieces. I think when it comes to, like, sets, costuming, effects, it did a pretty good job, and it told a really interesting story where it was focused more on the evil queen than it really was Snow White. Like, for a movie called Snow White, I don't think she had anywhere near enough character development, and we did not spend very much time with her, but it was really interesting to watch the queen go from, like, watch her journey. And that's kind of what it was more about, was the queen's journey. So that was really interesting. I think that even though we didn't get much time with Snow White and her and the prince didn't have much dialogue back and forth, they really did a good job with the few scenes they did have, because the actor they cast as the prince was really good at looking very earnest in his admiration of Snow White. So that was well done. It was believable. I think casting wise, Kristen Kreuk. Yeah, Kristen Kreuk she's in Smallville. She was also in the CW Beauty and the Beast show that was afraid to have an ugly beast. Anyway, she was a stunning Snow White. Her hair was very dramatic, and the way they did her makeup, the lips were very vibrantly red, but it looked natural enough that you could believe that maybe she just looked like that. So I think they did a really good job casting wise for her. I think it was interesting the way that they tied together so many different fairy tales. Like, they used aspects from the Snow Queen. They used aspects like the bear from Snow White and Rose Red. And I don't know why they added the whole genie granting wishes thing, but it was just fun and interesting and an exciting different take on the story, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and I think Hallmark used to probably try a little harder. And then time passed and years went on, and they realized that they had a really good formula with the Christmas movies, and then they just dedicated themselves to that formula instead of trying to make like different other kinds of movies. Now, granted, I don't watch Hallmark much outside of Christmas time, so maybe I'm being a little biased. But I don't know. It was fun. It was fun and it was good. And if you have the chance to either if you find some way to watch this, or if you find a copy of the VHS at your thrift store for $1 and you also happen to have a VHS player, go to town. It is a fun little movie. Anyway, that's all from me. That was Snow White, the fairest of them all. I had a lot of fun. Let me know what you think of this format, because I might try it again when the situation would suit. But thank you for watching. Let me know any movies that you'd like me to check out, or any obscure versions of Snow White that you might have in mind. Has anybody seen that weird animated one where she has long dark hair? Yeah, it's been a while, but I remember that one. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. What was your favorite part or your favorite character of this movie? Have you seen Snow White, Fairest of Them All? And are you going to see the live action Disney version? Let me know, like and subscribe, and follow me on Instagram and stuff if you're interested. I don't post all the time, but I do post sometimes. And it'd be great to see you. All right, well, that's it for me. Have a great rest of your evening. Jesus loves you. Bye. I don't know if you ever saw the CW Beauty and the Beast show, because it was a remake of the 1980s Ron Perlman Beauty and the Beast show, where they actually made the Beast like a half lion, half man who lived in the sewers. And then for this CW remake, because they were like afraid to have somebody not be conventionally attractive, they had a beautiful, gorgeous male actor with like a scar across his face. Obviously, it was a makeup scar, but like he had a scar across his face, and then his beast attributes were just this like super soldier serum he'd taken that would make him go like beast mode. But then, want to know what they did? Season 2, he went missing, like he got kidnapped by the government or something. And when he came back, they had surgically removed his scar. So he didn't have a single thing about his physical appearance that looked anything different than like very, very handsome. He was, you want to know who the Beast was? You ever seen It Chapter 2? And the guy, the guy they get to play the chubby kid, but grown up, and now he's buff? It was him. It was him. They took away the little fake Prozaid scar that they gave. I think Prozaid is what they do, where they put like latex or whatever, and then it like makes it look like there's a scar on the face. Yeah, they took his scar off of his face, and they're like, he's still a beast because he goes beast mode when he's like, the super soldier serum takes over and he gets scary and his eyes glow yellow. Yeah, that's a stupid compromise. Let the Beast be ugly. Okay? CW? Why am I asking the CW to do that? All they ever do is cast beautiful people. They're afraid of an average looking face. Yeah? That's it.